Today's event is entitled Women in Science, Profession and Policy in Ireland, marking St. Brigid's Day. And it's a wonderful collaboration today that we have both with the Irish government and the Irish consulate through the Immigrant Support Program and the Northern Ireland Bureau to bring this conversation to you. I'd like to welcome the co-hosts for the event, Irish Network Boston, and my colleague from Irish Network Boston, Jenny Lynch. Jenny.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much. So, hello, everyone. As Bob mentioned, my name is Jenny Lynch. I am a board member with the Irish Network Boston, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today, albeit virtually, as Bob said, to mark St. Brigid's Day 2022, with a discussion around women in science, exploring profession and policy in Ireland. Before beginning, I want to open the session today with just a few comments. Firstly, to thank our partners at the Ireland America Science Forum and to Robert Mauro, Director of Global Leader Institute at Boston College, for hosting today's event. Next, to mention briefly the Irish Network Boston, which connects Ireland's diaspora in Boston and offers members access to social and cultural events, business and networking opportunities, or simply put, the chance to engage with the Irish community in Boston. With that in mind, I would like to briefly mention that the Irish Network will be hosting its first in-person St. Patrick's Day social event in quite some time, this coming March 15th at the Harvard Club in Boston's historic Back Bay. While details will follow for those on the call today based in Massachusetts who would like to know more, please do not hesitate to reach out to me directly. Now to turn to the main event, today's discussion on women in scientific enterprise. I'm delighted to be able to open the discussion as I myself have a scientific background, and I'm the Senior VP of Life Sciences at Enterprise Ireland here in Boston. A big part of my role is to engage with innovative entrepreneurs driving scientific progress from the heart of the life sciences ecosystem in Ireland. More and more, those entrepreneurs are women, empowered by the support provided in Ireland to increase the participation of women in scientific endeavours. It gives me great pride to kick off today's session. And with that, I will turn over to Leisha Moore, the Consul General of Ireland to New England, to get us started. Leisha, over to you.
Thank you very much to Jenny for that kind introduction. Thank you, Bob, once again for hosting. And we are delighted to be partnering with Irish Network Boston and our friends at the Irish American Science Forum for another discussion on women in STEM around St. Brigid's Day, which falls every year on the 1st of February and is a celebration of women and creativity. And next year, I'm very excited and pleased to announce that in Ireland, it's going to be a full public holiday. But this year, 2022, delighted to be marking it as well here in Boston, as Bob said. Initially, we had hopes for in-person engagement, but it is a virtual engagement. Hopefully we will be transitioning soon to in-person engagements again, but I don't dispute the value of all of us participating in these Zoom arrangements. They have been very successful. We've had very successful events both with Boston College, with the Science Forum, and with Irish Network Boston in this format. So long may this collaboration continue. I'm really delighted that there's going to be an excellent panel today discussing, as Jenny said, science policy in Ireland and the role of women in developing that. And we have women from the island of Ireland involved in science in various ways. So I'm looking forward to hearing what's going to be, I think, a very interesting discussion today. So I'm going to hand you back to Bob, our host, to kick off the discussion. And thank you all very much.
And thank you, Leisha. I appreciate it. And thank you for your support. And thank you, of course, to the Irish government for the Immigrant Support Program that has provided the resources for the Ireland America Science Forum for the past number of years. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel now, and I hope that the panelists would join me by turning on their video. Our panelist today is a very accomplished panel. Jane Brady is the new head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service. She's the first female and external appointment at the Northern Ireland Civil Service in its 100-year history. It's quite remarkable achievement. Jenny joins the Northern Ireland Civil Service from her role as the Digital Innovation Commissioner. She also has a background as a partner in a venture capital firm, and she's part of the UK government's Innovation Expert Group. Professor Roisin Conley joins us from University College Cork, where she's the Gerald O'Sullivan Chair in Cancer Research. Prior to that, she was at Johns Hopkins, where she was a professor, associate professor of oncology. She's an expert in biomarkers and anti-cancer therapies. And it's lovely to have her here today. She'll be talking a lot, I hope, about the All Island Cancer Research Institute, which is a really remarkable organization. And last but not least, Maura Quigley from the board of Ireland America Science Forum. She's passionate about promoting women in science. And if you've been to ISF events in the past, you'll certainly be familiar with Maura. She has a PhD in immunology, and Maura, you can correct me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And you trained also at UMass Amherst and the National Institutes for Health in Washington, D.C. You're currently director of operations over at CRISPR Therapeutics. So thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's start the conversation. And I thought maybe, Jane, we begin with what you're doing. You have, as I've already said, you've joined the Northern Ireland Civil Service. You came out of your role as a Digital Innovation Commissioner. You're breaking some new ground. In preparation for this, I listened to some previous interviews, and it emerged, during that, you told a story about how you got into the science. You said, quite frankly, you weren't a natural engineer to begin with. You weren't a kid in your garage tinkering, that you took an opportunity with a scholarship, and then it propelled you into this STEM career. Now you consider yourself an engineer at heart. Can you talk a little bit about that opportunity that led you into the sciences, and why that was so important and kind of serendipitous as your career grew?
Thank you, Rob, and really delighted to be here. Yes, I guess my background, I'm from Belfast and brought up during the Troubles, and brought up in a family group which had no history of going to university or indeed science or technology or innovation. But luckily I did well in school. And actually what I was looking for was a route out, a pathway out of poverty, and a pathway out of Northern Ireland, if I'm very honest, because it was a bit of the Troubles. So that was my kind of initial exploration. I guess that great phrase, you can't be what you cannot see. I was good at science subjects, I was good at maths, and I was looking to get a scholarship, and that provided funding for me to go out. And actually for me, it's been the most tremendous platform, a career in science and technology. And that's why I was fundamentally an engineer at heart, because that logical decision-making perspective has served me well. So my career has been 25 of the last 27 years in the private sector. I worked in large multinational North American companies, first generation of the mobile phones. Worked in Japan, in TDK, working in those areas, and in Germany, and then in China as well with startups as part of large multinationals. And then was in a startup development as well, working again the first generation of rollout of optical networks, and then most recently in a venture capital domain, where we had about 80 portfolio companies of the island of Ireland. And I guess part of that showed me the opportunities of science and technology and innovation delivering better outcomes in terms of services for people, but better outcomes in terms of life chances and opportunities. And I made a decision 2 years ago to spend the next part of my career in a public service mode. And I saw how venture capital delivered results, but actually as a public servant, you have much opportunity to deliver that in a more systemic way. So I took up a job in the Belfast Region City Jail as Innovation Commissioner. We had a large £1 billion investment to be made as that, and defining that investment case of how we can use digital innovation to provide investment approaches that focus on where we are technology and innovation excellent, but also which can deliver an inclusive innovation strategy. And during that, the role in civil service came up, and I thought, you can't say you want to do this and not put yourself forward. So came into the role, and delighted to be. I took up posting in September. And again, we are at a period of renewal and a period of reflecting on, and I think no one could but stand over the last 20 months and what science and technology and innovation has done to deliver us in terms of change and better outcomes, but also what innovative way of thinking has done as well. So very much doubling down on that as we develop the renewal strategy for the civil service for Northern Ireland and delivering ultimately better outcomes for our citizens.
That's great. There's a lot to talk about. I think people here in especially on the East Coast of the United States are aware of the science talent that's in Northern Ireland and across a number of important industries. But before I get into that, one thing that really interested me that you commented in a previous interview was about the difficulty of securing venture capital for young entrepreneurs. And one thing you said was that you would try to encourage entrepreneurs to develop the networks that they need to have the introductions and the references to make that, to cross that barrier. In your experience and as an engineer and now as a leader, is that, I mean, what are some of the ways that policy can address that barrier, for people who are not traditionally in the venture capital world, maybe female entrepreneurs or minority entrepreneurs? I mean, what are some of the important things that could be done, at the state level, do you think, or in terms of administration to help people, make those connections?
That's a really good question. And yes, I was involved in venture capital in terms of analysing the amount of funding that went to female-led businesses. An analysis which took place at the UK level in 2018 identified that less than about a penny in every pound went to female-led businesses, and around 9p in every pound went to ones with a mixed interface. I guess a largely part of that was in terms of that network. There was a lot of you were 7 times more likely to get funded if you came from a referral, and some of those networks were predominantly of one gender or another. Now, through the funds I was in, we did invest with some really strong female-led businesses, one in Boston, Nova Lee and Uta Finnegan from Dundalk, and sure Jenny is aware of her, but some great businesses. But I guess in that network, it's providing access to people at the venture capital level. So I'm an engineer, 10% female in engineers, there's 10% female in venture capital, and then that cycles through to our businesses. So I actually very much agree that there needs to be a differentiated approach to addressing that, and assuming things will right themselves hasn't actually ever got us to a position. There'll be a step change. And I think in some senses, in terms of looking at investing through a single lens, it's been perhaps focused on one demographic and one level of risk appetite. So there is a need for a differentiated approach which addresses the areas that women are more likely to be involved in. And I know that in terms of health and life sciences is an area where there is a higher predominance of women in that place, in that workplace. So I guess creating funding schemes which align actually with the areas where initiatives are in place. I think there's great organisations. Awaken Hub is a great organisation across the island of Ireland, providing that peer mentoring and support for women-led businesses and providing access to those networks as well, in addition to actually having systemic things which actually are targeted to address the different characteristics that female-led businesses may look for.
That's great. That's really useful, and it's good to hear. I'd like to turn now maybe just to you, Roisin, and to talk about kind of inclusion in a different way. As when I introduced you as a professor at University College Cork. You were previously at Johns Hopkins. So you had this international career, and now you're leading, or you're key part of the All Ireland Cancer Research Institute, which reaches not only across the Atlantic but across the island of Ireland. What are some of the things that the Cancer Research Institute is trying to do when it comes to inclusion and that diversity that you're just in the middle of, working in this international space?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for the kind introduction. It's so nice to be here today and to be hearing perspectives from people who work in areas that are totally different to mine. But I can hear a lot of interesting overlap in terms of the terminology, that we can apply between the different disciplines. And I suppose I also just want to mention that I suppose I'm a medical oncologist in Cork University Hospital, which is half of my week. So I have one of these fantastic roles where I'm bridging the hospital side and the patients with the university, and that would have been the role that I would have had in the US at Johns Hopkins. So and really we're hoping to build more of these positions nationally so we can really drive the research agenda and improve outcomes. So I think the All Ireland Cancer Research Institute, which really was initially, I suppose, a brainchild of Professor Liam Gallagher from UCD, to me makes a huge amount of sense. It's about, we've just heard about developing networks for entrepreneurs and making connections. This is about connecting cancer researchers across Ireland, both north and south. At the moment, this is sort of an emerging entity. The hope is that it will be a virtual institute that is connecting us across the island. And not only connecting us north and south, but also connecting across disciplines. So again, we have cancer researchers who work in laboratories, who work with data in schools of public health, and we have people like myself whose primary research is focused within the hospitals in the sphere of clinical trials. And so trying to bring these groups and these disciplines together to think, well, what can Ireland do as an island? How can we make an impact? Because if we continue to work in silos, we're not going to have as much impact. And so expanding collaboration, thinking together, what are our strategic areas that we want to focus on? Because that's going to be more important in terms of an impact at the EU and at a global level. So, 4 main pillars have been identified as being of interest, within which we're going to be brainstorming. What expertise do we have in Ireland? How can we coordinate so that all of our energies are focused on a few areas that can then, be put forward for major grant applications, either European grant applications or opportunities that are, linking with the US and the National Cancer Institute. And so these areas are ultimately with the goal of helping patients. And again, thinking of, the better outcomes that was just mentioned by Jane. She mentioned better outcomes in terms of life opportunities and employment. For me, when we think about better outcomes, it's about better outcomes for either people who have cancer or who are at risk of cancer. So we're looking at how we can maximize in the prevention space, cancer prevention, preventing it ever from happening, the diagnosis space, better treatment options for patients by bringing together our expertise, and very importantly, improving quality of life and survivorship. And so it's about the All Ireland Cancer Research Institute is about, I suppose, building that critical mass of talent and of thought to make a greater impact globally.
Then, what are some of the main challenges that you're experiencing now as you try to do that in either building the expertise or the coordination issues? I mean, these are complex medical issues, complex scientific issues, and then people, as you said, are in their silos. Where are the pinch points for you?
So for me, I suppose some of the really obvious sort of challenges moving from the US to Ireland, where there are many, many large academic cancer centres where they are set up to have these team members, these disciplines working together in one location under one umbrella, with governance, covering all aspects of the work and the research. The way our system is set up here is that we have the clinical care taking place in hospitals, which have their own governance. That would be the HSE or Health Service Executive on the public hospital side. And we also have, private hospitals around the country where the patient care is taking place. And then we have a different governance system in the universities. And there's huge efforts underway to try and bridge so that we can work closer together, work better together, help each other, again, for that maximum impact. So that's a big agenda item for me, is having people work closer together. And then the other thing is, I suppose, relevant to what I mentioned at the beginning is the clinicians in Ireland. Many of them don't have the time for research or for engaging with researchers who are very active. And that is a big issue. I have one of few academic oncology positions in the country. I could count on probably one hand the number of people who have those. Ireland has a 5 million or so population. And if you think about, we have 5 clinicians in medical oncology who have protected time for research, and we've so many researchers to interface with. So building that capacity as we would have in academic centres internationally, where the clinicians who are patient facing and who can see the issues directly with the patients and have ideas about what we can do, have the time to actually think, strategize, and work with others to, you know, move again research ideas and clinical trials forward.
Yeah, that's this. The set of bureaucratic problems that are, I'm sure, frustrating to an expert who should be focused on the science and not trying to kind of get around some of these issues or find solutions. Maura, I mean, you have experience in Europe and the United States, and you're in one of the big centers around, you know, oncology and research here in the US. I mean, what Roisin is saying, do you experience that here in the United States as well, or have you seen solutions here, or are we struggling here in the United States with the same issues that Ireland does?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Thanks. I just want to first thank you for you know, the invitation to participate in this panel. I'm really excited to join with this lovely group of panelists, and I think, yeah, we have a lot in common. I think your point is very interesting, Roisin, about like how to create that infrastructure to kind of allow more seamless transition, you know, of ideas and of research to advance between the clinic and research. And it does take me back to thinking about where I, you know, did my PhD training at the Karolinska Institute. At that time, there was really, you know, that is a medical university, but has a, you know, a very, very large research output. At the time, there was really, you know, it was a moment where they're really transitioning to bring in more of the MD PhD programs, which was kind of, you know, seen as maybe delaying the decision point at which somebody went, you know, purely down a medical route versus a research route. And, you know, I think back to, you know, perhaps for all of us, we had that decision at one time, knowing just, you know, the kind of the, you know, the outcomes you can have from a career in research can really have an impact in people's lives and in the clinic. But, you know, do you really need to choose one route over the other? And I think those careers where you can, you know, really get deep into the thinking of the science and, you know, the beauty of the discovery of science, but have that practical application, you know, to help develop, you know, life-saving treatments for patients is really, you know, I think attractive to so many people. And I think, you know, that's certainly, you know, a career avenue that really could be developed and enhanced in Ireland potentially, because I'm sure, Roisin, you know, that's a model that's also widely in place in the US. And so, you know, we do have a lot of centers in the US where this type of background, you know, is perhaps more readily able to, you know, bridge between academia and, you know, the pharmaceutical, biotech, venture capital sectors. And I think that's a very rewarding career path to develop. And, you know, for Ireland to invest and develop a pipeline for that would, you know, I think, of course, make careers in science and medicine very attractive. I guess, you know, if what I understand, you know, Ireland has had a, you know, long participation of women in medical training, and, you know, perhaps career advancement or career pipeline for women in sciences. Maybe, you know, we have a long way to go, I think, to kind of really, you know, help create an understanding of what a career in science can be. I think, you know, we often have, you know, an understanding of what a medical career might be, maybe not the details, but I think that's a type of career that could really be, you know, showcased and, you know, be a very attractive one to, you know, to all students, but certainly also to women who are choosing that career.
Thanks, Maura. I appreciate it. You know, you spent some time in Sweden as well, and then you were in DC before coming to Boston. I mean, regionally, have you noticed differences in the way, you know, connections are made, capacity is built, or inclusion is facilitated in the sciences?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Bob. You know, yeah, I was fortunate, I think, to experience all those different environments, and certainly there's a lot in common. All science happens through networks. I think collaboration is key, you know, for any, you know, successful scientific activity. you know, perhaps the other cultural differences and how, you know, those various areas maybe interacted. You know, in Ireland, it can be quite informal. I think there's, you know, a real friendliness, I think, to how maybe people transition between, you know, the workplace and other networking activities. Sweden, perhaps, you know, I would have said it was a little bit more of a formalized structure. There was a lot of, you know, perhaps more, you know, ceremonial networking opportunities, particularly at the Karolinska Institute. I think, you know, a university of that size just has a lot of, you know, structure around how they support networks. And of course, the US really, I think we just have that critical mass of researchers. You know, we, particularly in Boston, I think, you know, we have so many academic institutions alongside the biotech and pharmaceutical, as well as, you know, the business side of things, that I think, you know, it's a very rich networking environment. And I think, you know, that's why really there's just a great engine to developing medicines in this area. So I think there's a lot in common. A lot of it's driven by just scientists' need to interact and to, you know, support and connect each other to really do the best science. But, you know, there are definitely some regional differences to how it actually comes to be. But I think that's what's fun. I think, you know, from all the panelists on the team, you know, certainly I'm sure benefited so much from, you know, experiencing all these different environments. And I think that's one thing that, you know, you could always, you know, count on in a career in science. I think that you'll have this need to connect and experience different, you know, different cultures and different environments to do the best science.
Thanks. Jane, we've been hearing from Roisin and Maura a lot about capacity building, coordination, team building. Maura used the phrase, you know, explaining what a career might be in sciences. And I know that some of this must resonate with you because you've spoken quite a lot about the importance of training and skilling for Northern Ireland's future digital economy. I mean, what are some of the things that you would hope that you would see out of, you know, Northern Ireland legislation and policy that would facilitate greater inclusion in the STEM areas, and that would facilitate, you know, this team building and the building of capacity?
Thank you, Bob. And maybe just to go back to a point that Moya made as well, in terms of the environment where we look towards supporting women who have a bias towards that medical and that biotech presence. And a reflection when I was in venture capital, but sometimes we use a model where you have to actually leave research in academia to go into a startup, and that sometimes that isn't the right thing. And often I find experience that keeping someone in a research domain and having them as a core part of a startup can be a very effective way of actually giving the value from that, but also it can make sure that different ways of working and models can be delivered as well, which can be open to more diverse subsets and groups. But to your point in terms of innovation and the Northern Ireland context in particular, in the last 12 months, we just launched a very ambitious program for our economy. It's called 10X, a Decade of Innovation. So it is roundly focusing in those areas where Northern Ireland has innovation and scientific and technology expertise. Health and life sciences is one of those areas. Digital, cyber, we are #1 destination for US cyber investment. Advanced manufacturing coming from our genesis of shipbuilding and aircraft. So I guess focusing down in those areas where we know we can compete, but narrowly enough and to not spread all our bets. And that's a very different approach from us, which was normally a kind of a spread bet perspective that all jobs and all industries were good. So with that comes ultimately an investment, and we've invested in centres of excellence, 5 centres of excellence for the city team around those core areas, research, but most significantly with interaction with industry in terms of that research and that translational impact. But the fundamental of that is providing that skills forum. And actually we've always had a really good export in terms of skill sets in science and technology within North Ireland, but we've never had enough. And our strength in the US has been phenomenal. #1 centre for US investment in terms of financial services. But we do have issues in terms of providing that skill set and flow. And that kind of brings me to that inclusion element and actually how we provide pathways to provide opportunities, both to satisfy our economy, which has a shortfall of these skills, but to include those more diverse groups, and women are predominantly among those. So 10% women still in engineering in Northern Ireland, 14% in STEM, one of the lowest areas in Europe. So we're actually wasting an entire kind of one of our natural resources, because we have highly qualified women coming out of schools and into universities who actually are not choosing to pursue those STEM qualifications. Yet we know that if we had those, we are more competitive. So we have just published a skills strategy, which includes a diversity element and how we can do things differently. So we have piloted some reskilling programs for women graduate leavers who have a non-technical background to rapidly reskill them. And in doing that, we've addressed actually what might be barriers to engagement in the workforce as well, in terms of wraparound care, facilitating more flexible working. And I actually really believe that the opportunities that the pandemic has brought us in terms of new ways of being flexible and working provide an openness for all those diverse groups as well. I guess the second piece of this is imperative to look towards how we focus on those areas. The pandemic has affected disproportionately some areas of our society, and under 25s is one of those, but actually women is another area. So we need to make sure that we're understanding what potential scarring implications are, and we build it in to providing those reskilling and sustainable pathways. So part of our decade of innovation will be looking towards building the skills we need, but focusing on the areas which have been disproportionately impacted as well, Bob.
It's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, how do you think you see that legislation and policy rolling out? I mean, obviously, if you follow politics in Northern Ireland, you know the executive right now is suspended. The First Minister resigned. I mean, in terms of your role and your ability to kind of implement that, you know, you're still working with the relevant ministers?
Yes, all our ministers are still in place in terms of their policy directives, and those policies have had sign up, some of them at an executive level, but some of them within individual policies. And you're right that we have no longer a First Minister and Deputy First Minister in place, but actually all those strategies are being delivered. Our Assembly is still meeting. It's passed legislation yesterday, and that's progressing. You'll be aware also that we're heading into a period for an election, which is scheduled for the start of May. So there'll be a new electoral mandate come out of that. But we have just developed our green growth strategy, which has also been approved by the executive. So much of that groundwork has been done. We're moving through the legislative framework before we go into a pre-election period, and moving along with our partners. The City Deal programme, we delivered and signed that off a number of months ago. So those areas have been embedded and move forward, and we're standing ready for when the FM and DFM again come through into post again.
Great, thanks. I know people here, especially in Boston, will be eager to hear that, given the number of connections you've already pointed out, a number of those, especially in the cybersecurity realm. My own institution, Boston College, we have a partnership with the Center for Secure Information Technology at Queens, and it's a strong one. So it's always been a very productive one. Maybe Roisin, we return to you and some of what Jane was just talking about. You know, Jane was talking about that connection between researcher and leader, and this is maybe a question that all of us can kind of talk a little bit about. But you all started careers in one place, a scientific place, an engineer, or in oncology, in medical sciences, and now you haven't left that behind, but you're also doing something else. You're leading an organization, leading people. Roisin, what kind of skill sets have you brought across from your training as an oncologist into your role as a leader in organizations and at the university?
Yeah, so I think you know, it's a difficult question, right? How did we get to where we are, and did we do it the right way? I suppose training and the career path in medicine is so long, especially when you're combining it with research, that you have an opportunity to work with so many people and observe, you know, different styles, different skill sets, and take from them what you feel works for you. I think that in any of the careers that we're discussing, I think it's really important for us to have good mentorship systems whereby we have go-to people at different levels. Almost sometimes when you're very early on to the point of micromanaging and working so closely with you, and over time less and less. But I think for me, what has been so important for me has been good mentorship. And I suppose my primary mentorship in the US would have been a female clinical researcher like myself. But I also had a fantastic mentorship from some of the faculty at Johns Hopkins who were men and who were very successful, both in the institution and also, again, at a national level with, for example, the National Cancer Institute. And I think learning and observing from them how they manage teams, you know, how they work a meeting, how they get things done, I think has been helpful for me. And the consideration of yourself, but also the people around you. Obviously, you know, if we're coming into a leadership role, we're supposed to be doing that for the institution, for the team, and for the individuals within that team. And trying to balance that, it can be difficult because there's only so much time, you know, in a week. So how do you look after yourself, look after those around you, and consider the greater good? I think what's probably lacking a lot of times is, although there are opportunities for formal sort of training and coursework in leadership, I think oftentimes it's something that's an option as opposed to mandated. And I suppose it's difficult because not everybody's going to end up in leadership positions. But I've definitely benefited from that type of coursework over time, identifying very obvious things to others, which I wouldn't have noticed. You know, even just little things about how we all have different personalities, and how if you're not quite getting what you want done, it's maybe because that person is just thinking about things in a different way to you. And so some of that coming out in formal training and coursework over time has been quite fascinating. So I think for me, having spent over a decade in a sort of a center of excellence, that has been a fantastic opportunity for me to observe, even if it wasn't directly within my sphere, observing how our cancer center director worked, you know, how the leader of this part of our program worked. And so I think a lot has been absorption. And for me, again, coming back to it, I think having dedicated mentorship plans and pathways for people, no matter what field they're in, is extremely important so that we can teach the next generation.
Great, thank you. You know, Moira, you know, we just heard from Roisin about the importance of mentorship, which is, I know, is something that's close to your heart, and the importance of pathways and training. But even more generally, I mean, your own career has gone from your time at the NIH or at UMass into this leadership role at CRISPR, and also your leadership role in IASF. I mean, you know, what are some of the challenges that you faced in taking that training across to those leadership roles? I mean, what are some of the things that helped you along the way as well?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I really agree with a lot of what Roisin said there. I certainly, you can think of echoes of that in my own career, and a lot of it is really, putting yourself in positions where you're learning from people who've, you know, figured out how to leverage their skills and how to build a team. You know, I think, you know, what strikes me at the moment is really the kind of the sharp learning curve we all kind of underwent in these past 2 years, where, you know, we obviously went into you know, not knowing how long this you know, way of working in a more virtual environment would continue. And I think what I've seen over the course of that time is that we've all realized that we need to be a lot more intentional about how we mentor and how we, you know, work, how teams come together and kind of get what they need to support the individuals and you know, create a strong team together. And I think you know, a lot of mentoring and a lot of informal kind of networking and teaching could have, happened a lot more casually, perhaps in the workplace, when everybody was co-located. But there really are skills that can be replicated. Things that have worked well in certain environments can be, taught and translated to be applied to other sectors. And I think, that actually makes me very hopeful that those types of skills can, be shared with people that maybe, are not currently in the position to move to a different company or a different environment. But, we can all, benefit from those skills, even without moving. But, I think, again, as Roisin said, it's really through a bit of self-reflection as well, like what works well for you, why is a certain team strong, realizing also that, over the years, teams kind of, they could be, in past times, maybe very, established teams that kind of had a certain way of doing things for a long time. We've all learned to be a lot more nimble, I think, in how we kind of understand what our team goals are, how we assemble the skills and people to work towards those goals, and how can you develop yourself to kind of adapt to that way of working. I think, again, the pandemic provides many examples of that, where things had to kind of change dramatically and adapt. And I think, when we kind of, past the major challenges of the pandemic, I think, we can all reflect on what we learned and, what we want to bring forward as we develop in our careers.
Thanks. Thanks, Maura. And I want to pick up on some of that with Jane. But before I do see a hand up from someone in the audience. If you do have questions, I definitely welcome them. Please send them through either the chat or the Q&A function, and I'll relay them. So Greta, if you can just type out your question, I will be sure to get it to the panel. But in the meantime, Jane, Maura brought up a really interesting point. It's one that we hadn't actually talked about. We're 45 minutes in, and we haven't talked about the pandemic. It's maybe a kind of a natural instinct now at this point to kind of avoid it, but you are stepping into a leadership role with the civil service that has been working through the pandemic for the past number of years. Your role is unusual enough, distinctive enough in normal times, in that you report to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and that you exist within, as a civil service within the United Kingdom. So I guess the big question in all that, and kind of laying out the context, is, what are some of the leadership initiatives that you hope to bring to the civil service now? Or are any of those inspired from your time as digital commissioner, as an engineer, or venture capitalist? What are you hoping to do as a leader?
Thank you, Bob. And yes, indeed. So you're right. I'm reporting to First Minister, Deputy First Minister, and Secretary to the Executive, but also I'm in my management role for 22,000 members of staff and a very significant budget, led obviously by the permanent secretary in that team. So the scale of engagement from being a singular role as an innovation commissioner and developing strategies is very different. But I guess some of the principles are the same, and I guess it's the clarity of direction and vision, defined, of course, by the policy intent and our programme for government, but how we match and deliver that forward has been really key to me. I've taken up 2 roles during the pandemic. My role as Innovation Commissioner, I started on the 1st of April 2020 and took up this role on the 1st of September 2021. So again, I've experienced going into a different environment, with different operating models in terms of engaging with staff. But for me, the pandemic actually, and what we have done, particularly in the public sector, and particularly in science and technology, it's proven, I guess, the opportunity that we can have in an evidence science-based approach, but also it's improved we can actually move quickly and rapidly. And who would have thought that the speed that the service can turn itself around to reconfigure itself for delivering at accelerated pace vaccines or booster jobs, but also supporting the economy, grant giving facilities, working with our communities and supporting those most in need. So it's proven actually through that kind of purge of the last 24 months, we can do things that we never thought possible. So my leadership position is actually, how do we make sure we don't miss this point, and this is an inflection? How do we make sure we equip ourselves with the skills to drive forward at pace? And one of the roles that I'm defining within my office is the Office of Innovation, and having that chief scientific lead and technology team regarding those decisions that we need to deliver for the next 10 years to deliver better outcomes for people that we serve. So for me, it's of course about making sure we deliver the critical services we have, but actually capitalising and doubling down in terms of the opportunity that we have now of doing things differently and getting better outcomes over that next decade, and then building the team to do that. So reconfiguring ourselves with different skill sets where we need to do it, embracing data and evidence base as part of that, and building the organisation which is fit for delivering those capabilities for the next 10 years.
And where are you in that arc? I mean, you just started, you just stepped in. You know, like, what's your timeline? Like, you know, when are you going to be introducing some of these measures, like the, you know, data analysis and decision making?
So much of that, of course, we have a very fundamental aspect of data analysis, as you'd imagine, in terms of statistics. Our Israel capabilities is excellent, but augmenting that for what we might need in the future. So both the FM and DFM both signed off in terms of that approach. So we're just going through that recruitment process. We've just identified 3 new senior roles reporting into me through the service in terms of delivering on the next generation impact. So we're in track at the moment, and we're about to obviously be set to go into a new mandate, new government. So to make sure we're ready for that new government to come in place and that new mandate delivering that.
Great. It's certainly an exciting time to be in your role and with the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Roisin, I want to ask you a very similar question. I mean, you're working in part in an organization. I think many of us were probably have experienced medical treatment during COVID, and certainly we've read about some of the challenges that took place in the hospital and are continuing in that case. But in your role as with the All Ireland Cancer Research Institute, I mean, how have you had to adapt through the pandemic to ensure that there is connection, across, from Ireland to Northern Ireland to the United States? And I think recently, the Minister for Health in Northern Ireland and the Cancer Research Institute here in the United States and the Minister for Health in the Republic signed an agreement. So there are connections clearly ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody will agree that the pandemic has really changed the way we've worked and the way we interact. And I think there are some challenges to the changes, but many, many opportunities. So I think that what we found in the medical and research community is that there's possibly a lot more of an ability to interact on a regular basis through the virtual platform. So, there are, regular educational events or research related meetings where people can very easily and quickly come together and then be efficient for the rest of their day, So I suppose I'm living in Cork at the moment, although I'm from Dublin, and I suppose traditionally people would have had to always travel to the capital, for important meetings with important organizations that were, based in Dublin. And I think what people are realizing now is that we can't really go back to that because it does limit equality. It limits the diversity of the discussions and the team members that are involved. And what we've also found on the patient side is that the virtual platform has enabled patients to much more easily interact with educational initiatives and opportunities. And so, for example, in our region, our team covers, the very large county of Cork and all the way into Kerry, and we have cancer support services within that region, and they're finding that they're getting much more reach, to the more distant parts of that large region. People who wouldn't have travelled all the way, from an hour and a half from the centres can now access the same initiatives that others can. So I think that has definitely been a big opportunity. A challenge on the again, the medical and research side, is that we thrive on interaction. We thrive on meeting people, on meeting old colleagues. For me, that's been very difficult because shortly after I left the US, the pandemic hit, and I've not been able to go back to meet my colleagues in person, which I think is oftentimes there's definitely benefits to that. Colleagues not only at Hopkins, but also at other institutions that we would have collaborated with. And oftentimes we would meet at annual meetings or, a variety of scientific meetings. And we haven't been able to do that. And so now that things are opening up, we're thinking, oh, hopefully we can do that again, which again is a good way to interact with our industry partners, our academic partners, our patient representatives. Now the bigger challenge is, should we be doing that from a climate change perspective? Should we be going back to the same? I would be traveling to the US probably 4 times a year or more if I was to attend the meetings that I would have regularly attended, throughout the year. So that is another challenge.
Well, Roisin, and this also Jane, we'd love to have you visit Boston College. We are open. I can't really speak for the climate. That is just another kind of policy puzzle for us all to kind of to work through, but you're always very welcome here at Boston College. We only have a few minutes left, so invite the audience, if you have any other questions, please do pass them on. But I thought maybe we might wrap up before I turn it over to Eamon, just with a little bit on St. Brigid's Day. And St. Brigid's Day is now a national holiday in Ireland. It is something that the Department of Foreign Affairs has used to engage with communities abroad, and especially here in the United States in a number of ways. So today we're talking about STEM and innovation, but there have been celebrations around Ulysses and history and all sorts of things. Maura, you grew up obviously with St. Brigid's Day, and you said something very interesting kind of in the run up to this. You said that you associate it with kind of spring in Ireland. It's a kind of a period of rebirth. We are decidedly not in spring, maybe today in Boston, but really not in spring here in Massachusetts. So I'm just wondering, has your view of St. Brigid's Day changed, as you've moved around?
Yeah, I noticed that too as well this morning, Bob. I did think there was a nice sunshine in Boston that did remind me of that first feeling. I think, 1st of Feb is very early for spring around here, and it doesn't have the same feel as it certainly did in Ireland, where I think we obviously used to wade into the rushes and get a good feel for how the weather was doing. But really, I think, St. Brigid's Day, of course, is not as widely known as, of course, the big event in March in the US. But there's, of course, a huge Irish heritage here, and St. Brigid's Day, and the traditions and the understanding of who Brigid was is known to some extent. But I'm really excited for the initiative of marking this occasion and really linking it to women in STEM as well, because I think we all associate Brigid with her her need to help others, and her kind of I would say her entrepreneurial streak, really just her kind of a doggedness and her resourcefulness. And I think those are great characteristics to have in science. And I think the world is really facing a lot of challenges that technology can really support, and I think combined now with the fact that this will become a national holiday in Ireland, I think it's a great direction for us to take, and really kind of mark this as a time to focus on how science can help society. And it really fits together with this time of year where we start to think of renewal and think of fresh starts and connection with each other. And I think that's just what science really thrives on. So I'm very happy to be here at this time, and I know that the spring will come to Boston very shortly.
I think we all kind of hope so. At this point, it's quite icy. It would be nice to get beyond that. But thank you, Maura. Jane, Roisin, I want to thank you as well for your time today. It's been lovely speaking with such heavyweights in the three of you in your fields. And you're doing some remarkable stuff, and I can't wait to learn more about the All Island Cancer Research Institute, Roisin, and to follow more about how the Northern Ireland Civil Services changing. So thank you for your time today. I also want to thank Irish Network Boston for co-hosting. It's a real honor to work with you guys and to connect, and of course the Irish Consulate for the support through the Immigrant Support Program. But before we leave, I'd like to turn it over to Eamon McConville from the Northern Ireland Bureau, who will say a few words. Eamon, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob. And I suppose for those who aren't familiar with the Bureau, we are the Northern Ireland Executive's representatives in the United States and Canada. And we have the very great privilege of showcasing the very best of Northern Ireland to a whole range of stakeholders here. It's been a real pleasure for me to close what has been an incredibly informative and inspirational session. It actually took me back to the time when I was deciding on my future studies and career path, and the role models that I looked to then in making that decision. One of those was my brother, who was an engineer. It wasn't just the enthusiasm that he had for his work, but how rewarding it was for him to be making a real tangible difference to people's lives. And I think that idea of making a difference to people's lives in their respective professions came across so strongly from all of our panelists today. I know that the inspiration my brother gave to me was probably a large factor in ending up as an electrical engineer in Bombardier, the aircraft manufacturers in Belfast. And I've no doubt that our three panelists today are inspirational role models for many of those now considering a career in STEM professions, particularly young women. It's such an exciting time to be considering a career in STEM, with opportunities arising in many areas. For example, in Northern Ireland, you heard Jane mentioning cybersecurity, fintech, and life sciences. And I think thanks to our panelists and other leaders, there's an increasing focus on diversity and inclusion to encourage more women into the STEM professions. So just to bring the event to a close, could I thank all of our panelists for giving their time and valuable insights today, and to you, Bob, for moderating the whole session. And I just finished by thanking everyone for joining us, and wish you all the best for the rest of your day. Thank you.